Hi everyone. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me on board on our React Finland conference. Super exciting. I think it's my first time at this conference. And yeah, I'm excited. So today, as Gianni said, I'm going to be speaking about design from the dimension of open source or the realm of open source, however you want to call it. So let's get right into it. So a friend of mine always said something. He said, open source is the new source. Like source, then source. Like that's the idea. His name is Adewale Apati. So yeah, let's move forward. So I do open source. I contribute to quite a number of open source projects on GitHub, from GreatSum to Vasil to Facebook to a couple of projects on Google, and I also have my own personal open source projects that I work on. So yeah, I'm also a GitHub star. So a GitHub star is a program that GitHub runs for kind of some people in certain regions, and we have about two in. Yeah, I didn't mention I'm based in Nigeria, and it's an awesome country here. If you have any chance to come to Nigeria, make it. So GitHub star at GitHub. Moving on. So senior developer advocate and developer programs manager. So I organize quite a lot of communities here in Africa. That's the Unstuck Africa, Africa Hacks, Developer Circles Lagos on Facebook, React JS Lagos, and Open Source Community Africa. Now let's get cooking. So designers can't get less creative over time. The more you create design assets, the more creative you get over time. So can't even give me a minute. I am having a small problem. Okay, got that fixed. So sorry, looks like I'm having a problem with my slides. Oh, it appears now. Okay, sorry about that glitch. So moving on. So I'm going to talk about the problem about design and open source, why designers do not like really like how open source is structured and how exactly we can fix this thing. But first, let's start with the problem of why a whole bunch of designers do not contribute to open source. This is we can definitely put together so let's move on to problems. So starting out with contributing to open source as a designer can be very intimidating as a designer and confusing based on the level of features you see already prepared with, now this part is really important, with little or no documentation. So usually when we see projects over on GitHub, we see them for like engineering projects, like for, you see documentation for engineers, documentation for like what there's no documentation for designers. This is something we need to fix. So when you get there, it's like a whole bunch of features, a whole bunch of pages that we need to work on, and there's like no documentation that is based and tailored towards designers. Is really confusing, and this is one of the problems designers have when they're trying to contribute to open source. So the next thing is the ideology of designers not needed in open source, but just make it work. A whole lot of startups and products out there are like, okay, I don't really care how designers, what I don't care about designers. What I care about is let this product work. And this is really wrong. It shouldn't be this way. Design is not an ideology; it's a professional profession that people should be hired for and should be paid properly for. It's really important. So that's just two major, that's like two out of like all the problems. But if we can solve those two problems, we're going to solve a whole bunch of all of these problems. So now we're going to move to the solution. So number one, resources tailored towards open source, how to contribute open source as a designer is really needed. Thanks to organizations like Open Source Design, Open Source Initiative, and others organizations trying to create content based on open source design. We have all of these communities out there and projects, companies, organizations that are trying to create content, video assets, like a whole bunch of things out there. So it can help designers contribute to open source faster and easily. So they're putting things together and they're working tirelessly on this. And yeah, this is really important. And the community should be definitely be involved in this part and support everyone more. So the next is we need conferences tailored towards open source for designers on a large scale, like what is even happening right now. We need open source tailored events showing people how to contribute to open source in real time as designers, from looking at the features already available to taking those features and documenting it down, writing the changes, then designing the screens out, then prototyping, then even sharing via URL on your Adobe XD. So all of those processes should be taken into accountability during this conference, and it's really important. And I'm going to talk about why just in a few seconds. So again, yes, tools. We need more tools. Yes, developers and companies, they're always building tools that will help developers become better engineers. We need to create more tools to help also designers contribute open source efficiently. As we're creating tools for developers, let's create tools for designers. This alone will solve most of our problems that we have with contributed open source as designers. So designers need to understand how to communicate with developers, and developers need to understand how to communicate with designers. It's like a two-way street. It's definitely a two-way street. So developers need to understand how to communicate with designers need to understand how to communicate with developers. Once we are being able to solve these two major problems, we're going to solve most of all of the problems, because developers speaking with designers is so design like so developer the designer designs let's say like a screen, and it's saying, okay, this button should work this way, this is the user experience I worked on, this is the UX I worked on, so it should work this way. Then the developer is working on it, and the output on in production is different from what the developer prototyped, and it's like, hey, do this, and the developer doesn't understand what designer is saying. Everything goes upside down because the developer doesn't understand what exactly designer is saying. So everything's really upside down. And once designers can speak to developers and developers can understand, things go smoothly. And once developers can also communicate what they want to the designers, things go also smoothly. So these two things needs to be taken into accountability for a whole bunch of things to work between designers and developers. So yeah, getting started with OSS, open source software. So basically, this is my definition of what I call open source. So open source in a nutshell is a free software built by the community for the community with improvement shared across different technical talents. So I'm going to take that again. So open source in a nutshell is a free software built by the community for the community with improvement project managers, developers, to designers, to technical writers, to all of these technical talents out there, to graphic designers, so they can do open source projects together. So that's basically what an open source project is to me. Good. Okay, so the web has been open source since Google Chrome released something called the web view page source. So the view page source basically is somewhere you can go to and you can see really all the HTML code of the website. So the web has been open source since when Chrome released the view page source feature. So once you right click, you see an option called view page source. So once you click on this, it gives you a whole new tab where you see the HTML code of the website. So automatically you can reach through this and understand certain things that like needs to be changed on the website. The next thing is the inspect element part. So as a designer that understands CSS in quotation, as a designer that understands CSS, you can also use the inspect element option where you can click on that and you get to see the HTML and CSS. So you can like validate and see where certain things are going wrong. You can also do this. So how can designers begin contributing to open source? So the best place to start out, no matter what you're working on, is the issues tab. As designers, developers, you don't jump straight to create a pull request because you saw a problem that like something doesn't work properly. You don't do that. You go to issues tab. If the issue is open, they already make a comment, or if it's not, create a new issue, tag the maintainers and talk about it. So the issues tab is the best place to start out. So the first thing you do is you evaluate the chosen project's workflow, user experience, color combination, and every single component you need to take a look at. So every single component you feel that you want to change, you take a look at them, evaluate them, make document, write them down. Then once you've done all of this, then you can like create an issue doesn't exist. So create an issue and tell you're facing and the potential fix your proposal. So the next thing is feature never start a feature without consulting one of the project authors. If it's a valid ad or how exactly it can be improved. Most times we always start features even without consulting with the maintainers, and we just like push a pull request and it's all upside down and at the end doesn't get merged. The best practice is always to really check with the maintainers first. This is what I want to work on, and it's going to take this timeline, and like they're like, okay, I think this is great, let's add it, or we can't have this for this version, let's move this to the next milestone. So if no pull request, you didn't tell anyone, just open a pull request, it didn't get like accepted, everything goes to like everything just goes upside down and pull requests get closed, and that's a problem. Let's move forward. So yeah, next is coming up with alternative design patterns, but raising an issue in relation to why and how, and also timeline. So why, how, and timeline, really important. So you need to come up with design patterns that you think that would work for these open source projects, and yeah, why it should be changed, how you're going to work on this, and the timeline you will need. You're going to share all of these things so as to really convince them of the changes you want to make and why they should say yes to this pull request or issue. So the next thing is, if you really want to contribute, if you want to contribute open source really badly, and as a designer, you're gonna want to really convince these people. So the first step, you need to prototype your design properly, because there are certain people that wouldn't even really believe you. What you're gonna have to do, you're basically gonna have to really try your best to really convince them. It's like I own a startup and I'm trying to pitch to a group of VCs or angel investors. I'm gonna create an amazing slide that put like all my timeline and everything on my slide. I'm just gonna like take everything out there and be hardcore with my presentation to the investors. So same thing here as a designer, you have to go the extra mile by even prototyping the design assets you are doing, so they can see in production how exactly it's going to work. If they actually chose that you should like just design a prototype and send it in, so they can see it. So try to prototype your design if you want to really convince the owners of the projects to make things like easier for you, so as not to have like a really long thread of discussion of them asking questions. Just prototype your design, send it to them, and yeah, things go great. So so this part is really funny. So I'm gonna mention myself. So I design also, but I also do engineering. So but then these are some crappy things some engineers say about design. I'm just gonna mention some. So if you're a developer here, bear with me for these few slides. So yeah, some engineers say design is an ideology, not a professional profession. So I've heard some engineers say this, and it's very wrong and shouldn't even be said at all. So design is a professional profession. It's a department. It is super important as the engineering team. Most engineers will be clueless if there were no designers. That would be so hard. That would be so hard. Like, you're just gonna disrupt the whole workflow. So it's always best to have a designer in the team so they can help you get the best user experience on building your product. So design is not an ideology, it's a professional profession. But please, no one should ever say this. And if you see someone saying this, try to correct them in an amazing way and just get them to improve and never say this. Next is, if the end product is quality software, why can't designers code? Now, so I think this is the most popular one that a whole bunch of people say. So if the end product is quality software, why can't designers code? Yeah, so yeah, I know, like, this is actually a valid question, but if it's depend on the way this question is being asked. So if the input the question, why can designers code? Designers don't need to like know how to code. It's not a mandatory thing. But what's important is knowing how to communicate with the developer, so you can understand what they are saying, and you can also communicate properly how the feature should work to the developer. So what's most important is the communication part, not knowing how to code. Is the communication part, not knowing how to code. If you cannot write CSS or HTML, it's not a bad thing at all. Or if you can, it's just a plus. If you can, it's just a plus. But it's not mandatory as a designer. It's not mandatory at all. So design is one of the most significant department while building startup products or working on an open source projects. So design should never be undermined by any reason whatsoever. It's an official department, and it's something that should be taken with the utmost what word should I use, seriousness. Because trust me, if your design is bad, your performance is great and your accessibility is great also, but then your design is crappy, you will lose people, you will lose clients, you will lose a whole bunch of people because your design is bad. So design is something that should be taken into like full accountability when working with any open source project, or even like startup projects or anything at all. Design is really important. So as I said before, the web as an open source for designers. Also, when the web inspector element came out where you can live debug CSS, this is not as a design. When you understand CSS, you can read CSS. You can use the inspect elements to see like the code, the CSS part, what exactly is causing this and how exactly it can be changed. And you can show them like a dummy version. I think I'll call it the dummy version of how it should work instead. That's if you can write CSS, but again, it's not mandatory. You can just make a prototype and show them how it should work from the prototype. And thanks to Adobe for creating the prototype share feature. So once you design, then you prototype on your Adobe. There's a tab called share. So once you click share, you create a unique URL where you can share your prototype to people via that unique URL. And they can literally use your application from that URL. So just share the URL to the maintainers, they use your application like, oh, it's amazing. Let's make this work. So the next thing is version control. So for designers, we both know designers have something called design history. For anyone who has used something called Adobe Photoshop, as you design on your Adobe Photoshop, automatically you have something called design history. So as you make changes on your Adobe Photoshop, every single change you've made are being logged automatically. So as you even move a square to the right, that's been logged. So that's the design history. And something like Git for designers, I think, yeah. So this is actually okay. I'm gonna say this because if you're looking to contribute with me on this, I'm definitely open to contributions on this. You can just send me a DM over Twitter. So I'm working on a tool that would help designers being able to be able to contribute to open source. So I thought about a way. So how about if designers can actually design on Figma, SketchUp, or Adobe XD, and also push their designs straight to GitHub as SVGs, and also retaining the prototype of these applications they have? That would be amazing. I thought about this, and this is what I'm currently working on. But I'm currently facing a whole bunch of problems. But if you want to help on this, it's definitely open to contributions on this project. So it would be so amazing if designers can also push the project from SketchUp, Figma, or Adobe XD to GitHub as SVG files, and also import from GitHub as SVG files straight to Adobe XD, SketchUp, or Figma, and still retaining the prototypes that were done initially. So it's really confusing, but yeah, that's just working on currently, and I think it's going to be valid adds to a lot of designers out there. And yeah, if you want to help contribute to this as a designer, as a developer, it's definitely open. So the next thing is, as I said before, you have to go hardcore. If you want to really convince the maintainers and you really want to contribute open source, you love this project, you have to go hardcore. You have to also go the action of designing for multiple devices, multiple screen responsiveness, if you really want to convince them. Because you get to some point like, I want to convince these guys, I want to contribute to this project. I'm this deliberate. I'm going to go as far as sending DMs on Twitter, opening issues, sending stuff into the GitHub discussions tab, even going up to Slack channel, like that bad. And I'm going to create designs for multiple devices because I love this project and I want people to love it too. Because I'm a developer advocate. I want to make people's life easier with products that I believe in and I use. So I'm going to make this better and I'm going to advocate for this product, even though I'm not being paid for it. Doesn't matter. So convincing people, you have to go the extra mile to do this, especially for designers. You have to go the extra mile because not everyone believe design is super important. They just make it work. And to really change their perspective about this, you really have to go the extra mile to convince them. So the next thing is, this part starts writing documentation for other designers to see and follow along. Is a trend that someone has to start. If no one starts writing documentation, come on, we all have this documentation for developers and that's it, then that's a big problem. Someone has to start. So someone didn't start because they believe someone else would. At the end, no one ends up starting until probably a couple of years later, or probably again, one eternity later, then someone probably, that's still on a probability, right? So documentation. But I say, let's start writing documentations for designers today. This is really important for designers and it will make them feel welcome in an open source community. And let's start doing this today. You can tweet this if you want to. Let every developer out there, let every designers out there hear about this and let them write documentation for designers and make them feel welcomed. It's really important. As I feel welcomed when I see some documentations, designers also should feel welcomed the same way. You can just create a session that's saying designers, then documentation, how they can contribute. Even the open Figma file, they can just duplicate and make changes on, make it open source. The future is open, and let's begin to work along that path. So I'm going to talk about a few tools about design. I'm just going to run through this part real quick. So for design, we have Figma, Adobe XD, and SketchUp. For prototyping, we have InVision Studio, we have Adobe XD, we have Organimi Studio, we have Sketch, we have Webflow, we have Framer, we have Zeppelin, we have FlowMap. So discussion and collaboration, Zeppelin, Slack, Figma, InVision. So all of these tools, they all have Slack extension that I could install. That you could also track your design and your conversations on Slack when you have a private Slack channel or a separate Slack channel for Zeppelin. So you get to see and track discussions from Slack and send message from Slack and it appears on Zeppelin. So that's a process that you can work on when you're doing this. So yeah, resources are not openly distributed as it was today. So before it wasn't as openly distributed as it is today. We have people writing articles, creating video content, running workshops, running conference talks, writing even research articles, and even a whole bunch of things more. Today's the best time to start contribute open source as a designer, and I believe you should not start tomorrow. You should not start tonight. You shouldn't start in the next 1 hour. You should start contributing to open source as a designer right now. You should start writing documentations for designers, not in the next 1 hour, not in the next 2 hours, but right now. It's really important, and we should make designers feel welcome in the open source community. And yeah, it's gonna make things a whole much easier. So yeah, this is some resources of some companies who have like they're big on open source. Yeah, so we have Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, and all these organizations you can take a look at. Thank you very much. You can ask questions. There'll be a Q&A session. You can also follow me on Twitter and GitHub with my handle is @developer.io. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for this presentation. I think, you know, you present this kind of world in which there's the designer who wants to get into the open source ecosystem and contribute to this project. And at the same time, we have like this other projects that are just screaming for design help and like not finding it. Like, where do you think the disconnect happens? What do you think these projects can do to kind of connect with those people who want to be contributing to open source?
Okay, so the first step would really be creating that portion in the README file for designers. So designers need to feel welcome. I know a whole bunch of designers who do not feel welcome when it comes to open source. So they don't bother themselves, because why? It's so hard. When they send DMs about design, they don't get responded to because they don't take them serious. Designers need to feel welcome. The first thing you need to do as a maintainer of an open source project is create a section in the README file for designers saying designers documentation, or just call it designers. Then all they have to do is really just come on there and just like follow the documentation and know what exactly to do. Like, it's really that straightforward. Just create a portion of documentation for designers, and don't leave designers like out of things. Not just designers, technical writers, make things, don't over. So a lot of people, when writing articles, even I've seen companies who also make the same mistake. You, as a company, you're having a documentation page on how to use your API, your CLI, your SDK, whatever tool you created. You should never assume that the audience automatically knows how to install node modules. You don't do that. You have to go from the least thing. So even a beginner would understand. This process is also done when doing articles. You all assume that, say, install your node modules, do this, do that, and you don't really document it properly. That's wrong. You don't do that because you're addressing general public. So someone might see your article in the next 5 years and is totally confused because it's his first time. And even official document, you don't do this. You always start from the smallest part. Install node modules. You go to node.js.org. You download this. You click this, and so if it's going to be long, let it be long. In as much, it's super important. It's self-explanatory, and nobody needs to comment and say, "Hey, I didn't understand this part." It should be super explanatory. In open source projects, create a documentation part, and yeah. So this was going to make designers feel welcomed when you have a portion. Really, when you have a portion for designer documentation.
Yeah, I think like where most technical projects on GitHub are is that they have been designed by developers, in that like there is no design process. They maybe didn't even use design tooling yet. They've just hacked something together, and now they would really like to welcome somebody on board to kind of like make it nice. And developers often underestimate the amount of like involvement it takes to create a good design. It's not just going into Photoshop and making something pretty. It's to actually understand, what the product is doing, and like who the audience is and how to communicate to them. So like, how do you start that conversation from like either as a designer or as the project? Is how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah. So you do not bring designers on board when you're done with the project. You don't do that. That's stress. You bring a designer on board when you're starting the projects. One of the most important factor is, so as a designer, so now there is difference in between and a UX designer. They are two different roles. But one person can also do UI and UX, but they actually two UI designers, they are user UX. So UI is user interface. Are using your application. They help do all of these experiences, and developers can really so developers listening to this, I'm so sorry because so developers often always build products in a way they feel developers will understand, and not the general public. That's the truth. I'm a developer also. I sometimes do this. Like, yeah, this is why we need designers and UX designers on board. They will help with their experience on how exactly what should go next, because these are the people really thinking about the public users. But developers, they always want to build for really so other developers could understand. Even when documenting our APIs, we document it so other developers can understand. But once documented in a way that like anyone reading the documentation will understand and what to do next. So yeah, I think going back to the first thing I said, so designers should never be brought on board in the middle of the project or at the end. It should designers, and like when I say designers, I mean like UI and UX designers should be brought on board at the start of the projects to even work on the architecture itself. From the architecture end to the production, everything designers should be in the full scale, so they can also make their comments and make things better, and also speak for the users who are going to be using the product. Yeah, also like I think they're like second customers, so you can call them that, second customers.
Yeah, I think this is like the tricky bit about open source is that, you cannot like staff open source the same way you can staff a commercial product company. Is like, if you as a developer have an idea for a product, how do you find a designer to work with you before the product even exists? Like, how can you communicate the value of somebody donating their free labor to your project, before that project is even a thing? I mean, I'm not asking you to answer that question because it's so hard that I don't think there's an answer to it. But like, this is.
I think. Okay, can I?
Sorry, go ahead.
I actually want to answer.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing. Excitement is contagious, actually. It hello.
Hey, yeah, we lost you for a little bit, but you're back now. Could you repeat? Yeah.
Yes. So okay. Wow. I think what I was saying like really jumped out of my head.
I mean, the only bit that we heard here is excitement is contagious, and I definitely feel
yes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Okay, so yeah, excitement is really contagious. As a developer advocate, it's only when I'm working advocating for projects, I must be excited. So when I'm still with my community, they feel my excitement and they even want to use the projects I'm advocating for, because why? They are feeling my excitement. So if I have an open source product, I built this because I am excited. So I built a tool because I have issue to read colors called Image Hive. And I'm like, okay, hey, I want to. It's not open source actually right now because I'm still trying to build the software to a point where I can make it open source. But right now I'm still working on it. So I'm excited about this. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take it straight to Twitter. Say, hey, I'm working on this product. I'm super excited about it, and this is the problem I'm solving. This is the ecosystem I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help the designers and the developer ecosystem to together with this project I'm working on. If you feel you love this project, I'm looking forward to contributors. Then the next step is to tag open source organizations. Tag them, so they retweet your tweets. Then people, open source designers who follow these open source organizations get to see your tweet and like, hey, they check out your product. They're excited. Also, they saw how excited you were, how far you've gone with the project, because nobody will accompany you on a project you don't even believe in. You have to firstly do all the work first. Then when you're bringing someone on board, the person just has to just support you in a little way. Not that you just give the person a full-time job for free, like not getting paid. You don't do that. You have to still like do most of the work, definitely. Then just give them that portion of work that they will just help you and support you in. So they must see that you're committed, you're always pushing something every day, you're making contributions. Like you bring someone on board and you disappear. So the person just keep working while you just keep sitting. So yeah, so that's it. Sweet about it. SAC, open source organization, open source initiative, open source design, open source community Africa, open source community like in the US, yeah, just check open source communities. They're gonna retweet. You're gonna find people over Twitter who love open source, and you definitely find contributors there. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's actually a lot better answer than I was hoping for. So thanks for that. We have time for one final question. And for me, that would be, what do you think is like a project, an open source project that does this well, like brings non-programming designers on board well, so we could all go and look at and learn from?
So I don't know anyone right now, that's for sure. I haven't even seen it. Like no one is doing this as far as I've seen. I'm probably wrong. because I don't know, I haven't seen any, but I would say for open source initiative, open source design, like the things I mentioned about documentation for designers, they don't do that already, but they create resources tailored towards supporting designers and showing them how to contribute to open source projects over on GitHub. But I haven't seen, for the things I'm recommending, which is creating a portion in the README file for designers, I haven't seen that yet, and I'm saying that that should be a thing. People should do that. Like, this developer should do that. This is really important. So yeah.
I definitely agree with all of that. And if there are any designers who see this talk video later, please do talk to your neighborhood, friendly neighborhood developer. We aren't all as mean and small-minded as some of the anecdotes that you might hear. Might portray as us. In fact, if you talk to a front-end developer, there's a good chance that they are a designer themselves. So there's a lot to geek out together.
Yeah, that happens a lot of times.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the talk, and thank you for the Q&A.